All right. So while Tyler's coming up here and setting up, I'm going to ask him a couple of questions. So you want me to just kind of move all this stuff? Do you need a dongle?
No, I've got all that.
Got all that? Okay, cool. I'll just drop all this here. We'll figure it out. Yep. Who is this guy? So, Tyler, how long have you been in InfoSec?
Over 20 years.
Over 20 years. All right. And what do you do today?
Currently, I am the lead of incident response at Trusted Sec.
Hey, Trusted Sec. Nobody's heard of him. Oh, by the way, go talk to Jake over there from Trusted Sec. Woo! Yeah, I got it. Here, just grab this. Oops, sorry. And I will get this out of your way. Put that there. And then I will go around. Do you want the wireless? There's 2 wirelesses, or that guy there? Okay. I'll pop one on for you. Okay, that one's ready to roll. Anything else anybody wants to know about Tyler?
I'm pretty, actually, so I'm pretty vanilla, so it's actually vanilla. But the non-chocolate birthday cake ice cream flavor is really good. I really like that.
Why is your laptop shut?
That's shut.
Did you say shut or shit? How rude.
What's your favorite dinosaur?
Oh, man. I'm going to have to go with probably Brontosaurus. I just think it's cool.
Who was just talking about Brontosaurus?
I know.
I just learned this yesterday from that guy right there.
Not what I fucking meant.
So, Adrian, why is there no longer Brontosaurus?
Dinosaurs is actually what the Brontosaurus was originally categorized. The first thing it gets in zoology categorized is the official name. Someone took a mistake and they took basically the Pterosaurus body and put on I believe it was a Chimaerosaur head. So they put the wrong head on the wrong body. So that Brontosaurus never actually existed. It was a combination of 2 different bone sets, so it's been kind of discontinued. And what we normally think of the Brontosaurus is the Pterosaurus, or I think of Chimaerosaurus.
I don't find it.
Everybody get that? All right. Hey, somebody's calling bullshit up here. Oh.
Now take it offline. Take it out.
That's a good question. Barney? Not so much. Nah.
I said I had a clicker, but I can't find it. So
Okay.
Tyler, what's the last name?
Hudak.
H-U... Yep, sorry. H-U-D-A-K.
Come on, I'll find you out.
It's in here.
Hey, Tyler, what's your favorite pronunciation of your last name?
Hudak. Is this on? Yeah. Alright, what am I doing?
You may have to switch views. Yeah, flip the... Up top, yep. Then not that one. Yes, that one. Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, Tyler Hudak.
All right. Everybody hear me okay? Awesome. So this is a talk that I've been wanting to do for a while. I actually came up with the idea a couple years ago and have been wanting to submit it and just finally got into the last 2 days deciding to throw it together and put the slides together over the last day or so, although I have been doing research for a while. It's called Computer Forensics Case Files, 3 Tales of Murder, Porn, and Disassembly. Anybody in here true crime fans? I know it's really big, right? Yeah, so, I'll get into what this is. Like I said, my name is Tyler Hudak. I'm the lead of Incident Response at Trusted Sec. Been in IR security for over 20 years. Complete geek nerd. If you ever get on a conference call with me, like a Zoom call, asked to see my background, I usually have it hidden. It's just a huge bookcase of all role-playing books, like 20 plus years of collecting role-playing books, like 400 books or so, something like that. Just a note, I'm kind of not speaking on behalf of Trusted Sec. I will absolutely talk about Trusted Sec just because of the nature of this. I'm kind of doing this on my own, so the normal disclaimers apply. Excuse me. So what does this talk about? Why am I doing this? I'm sure you've all heard the phrase that goes something like, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." There are lots of different versions of this. The earliest that I could find this attribution to was George Santayana, who was an Irish novelist, poet, so on. Winston Churchill said something very similar. There are a couple other people who kind of took that quote and made it their own as well. But one of the things that I found is that in computer forensics is used a lot nowadays. Pretty much every case you look at or that happens either in the public or the private, computer forensics are involved somehow. But it's been going on for a long time. Computer forensics isn't a new science. It's still really young. And so because of that, there are a lot of really, really interesting cases that are out there that have actually been talked about publicly or semi-publicly that we can actually learn a lot from. Even though these cases may have happened years ago, they can still teach us things. And so I'm going to talk about 3 of those cases right now. The first case the first 2 cases are publicly available. The knowledge is publicly available. The third case is one that I actually worked, I think it's about a decade ago. It has been talked about publicly by myself and others on my team at that time, so I feel comfortable talking about it. It's not going to hurt anybody by me talking about this and so on. Just kind of I probably don't need to put this in here, but, just trigger warning, we are going to be talking about murder and porn. I know that might set some people off. I'm not going to show any graphic images. I'm not going to have any graphic descriptions. There is some obscene text in here, but just wanted to, throw that out there. If anybody needs to get up and doesn't want to hear it, I am, not going to be offended at all. All right, well, then you get to stay. Just so I know, how late do I go to? Awesome. All right, so first case we're going to talk about is the BTK killer. He is a serial killer. How many people have heard of BTK? Wow, a lot of you. Cool. So hopefully some of this is new to you then, or what I'm going to be talking about. I know some of this is going to be new because I actually interviewed the forensic analyst who worked on the case. But to get into it, the background. So, Wichita, Kansas, 1974, January 15th of 1974. 4 members of the Otira family. I'm assuming that I'm pronouncing that right. If I mispronounce any names, which I probably will, I apologize. But 4 members of the Otira family were murdered in their home. This was, you can imagine, 1970s, early 1970s. This probably isn't happening a lot. There's not a lot of murders. It's not, at least not as talked about as much as we have on today with social media and almost instant news everywhere. The 4 members are there. They were actually discovered by 3 of their children as they came home from school. And these weren't, just somebody getting killed. These were pretty horrific murders. As time went on, in 1974, there were 3 other murders. Kathleen Bright in April, Shirley Vian Relford in March of 77, and then in December of 77, Nancy Fox. The police were... First, I believe that they were not able to connect these right away, but soon they were because the killer started to toy with them. He started to leave them messages. In fact, I believe the first message that he left, he put a letter in an engineering book in the Wichita Public Library. Let somebody, I don't think it was the police, I think he called the local news station, which was KAKE out there, and let them know that there was that letter there. They went and got it, and that's how he first claimed the murder. So this went on for a long time. From 1977 to 1991, the BTK killer murdered a total of 10 people that he at least claimed or they were able to connect to him. Now, the police weren't just sitting around trying to not do anything. They made multiple attempts to try to catch him. In one case, and you can read about all this publicly. There were books written about this. I think if you watch the series Manhunter, one of the main killers was based on BTK. But they made lots of attempts to try to catch him. In one attempt, they actually did a trap and trace with a phone call that he made to one of the local news stations. They were actually able to trace it back. And remember, this is 1977, or in 1970s, 1980s. It's not like you can just, it's not like, NCIS or CSI where they're gonna, you have like multiple people on the keyboard, writing Visual Basic and going in and, tracing it back with those little lines that kind of jump around. This is like literally having people at the different stations trying to figure out who or where those calls are coming from. But they were able to trace it back to a phone booth somewhere in Wichita that he had called from. Unfortunately, by the time the police got there, he obviously was not there. In another case, another time, he actually called 911 to report one of the murders. I believe it was for Nancy Fox. He called 911, and basically said that there was a murder at, or he said something along the lines of, "You'll find a murder at," and gave the address and then hung up. They actually record this. You can actually go and listen to it. Unfortunately, they weren't able to do any type of voice matching or anything like that because the tape recorder that they taped it on, again, 70s, 80s, they didn't have automated recording systems. It was actually recorded on a tape recorder, and for some reason the tape recorder taped things slowly or something like that, so the voice was distorted. And so they were, in other words, the police were having trouble, trying to catch him. In one of the letters that he sent, and so I cannot confirm this. And so I tried to go and tried to find the actual letters and newspaper articles around this and try to confirm as much as I can. But in one of the letters, he ends it with saying, since sex criminals do not change their MO or by nature cannot do so. Let me say, too, I had somebody review this and they started correcting all the errors in the quotes. These are actual quotes. Any mistakes in these quotes are not my own. But since sex criminals do not change their MO or by nature cannot do so, I will not change mine. The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, misspelled that, kill them, BTK. You can see he added again, they will be on the next victim. And so he kind of named himself. This is where his name came from. This was in one of his letters. I'm not sure if this was the first letter that he sent or the second. I wasn't able to confirm that one way or another. But in each time, he would, eventually leave these, and so that's how they were able to come up with his MO. And just to kind of state it again, these are not just somebody just going and murdering somebody with a knife or something. They're pretty horrific. There's torture elements, there's sexual elements to these killers. So the police to these murders. So the police really wanted to catch him. Unfortunately, so from 1991. Until 2004, the case went cold. He didn't murder anyone, or at least they didn't find anybody that they could tie to him. And then March 17th, 2004, the BTK contacted the media again. Now, the interesting thing about this was the 30th anniversary of the Otero family murders, his first murders. I, again, have not been able to confirm this. I have read that the reason he started up again, or at least the reason he started contacting the police and the media again, is because one of the Wichita newspapers did an article on the 30th anniversary of the murders on BTK, and basically talked about how they had never caught him, and I believe that they reasoned that he might be dead, which is why he went silent. And obviously, serial killers, or a lot of serial killers, have pretty big egos. He couldn't let that stand, and so he started toying with the police and the media again. This is one of the letters that he sent. You can't really see it right here, but he actually sent it from Bill Thompson Kilman, is who the address was, the return address was to. So again, he's toying with them pretty hard. He did this in a couple of different ways. He kind of changed, instead of sending letters, he did it with the first one. He would actually take cereal boxes and take Barbie dolls and do reenactments of his murders or his torture in there, along with a little note. And he would just throw them in random places. In one case, he threw it in the back of somebody's truck at Home Depot. They ended up throwing that away, and then he didn't hear anything, so he contacted the police, and they actually had to go and dig it out of the trash and things like that. So he was communicating with the police this way, just kind of upping his game. As far as I know, he didn't murder anybody at this time. Although, from what I understand, he was definitely planning it. He was hinting at the police that he had targeted some people, and this is what he would do. He would stalk people. He would get to know them, figure out who they were, their routines, and so on. And that's what he would do. Now, in one of the letters, he asked which he sent to the news station. He liked to communicate with KAKE. Sorry, that's a little blurry. But he asked, "Can I communicate with floppy and not be traced to a computer? Be honest." So, what do you think the police said to this? Exactly. They said, "Yes, we cannot trace you if you send us a floppy disk." And what's interesting too is they were actually communicating back and forth via ads in the newspaper. Again, I have not been able to find these ads. I really want to find these ads. But that's what they did. The police, of course, said, "No, there's no way that we can trace you back to a floppy." Now, understand, too, this is 2004. So this is, 15 years ago? If I'm doing 16 years ago? And remember where we were 16 years ago. I think Windows XP was out, maybe. That sounds about right. I can't remember. Vista may have just been coming out. Floppy disks were still standard in computers. CD-ROMs were not always standard, I think. They were starting to become that. So you can imagine, just remember back then, the internet is still fairly new. Not a lot of people have it, or they may have AOL. And so, even more importantly, computer forensics is an extremely new science. Nobody is really doing this. Maybe the government, maybe some well-funded police stations. NCASE is the number one tool. It's really one of the only tools out there for this. There are a couple others, but not as well accepted. So it's not like you have the ability to download Linux Sift and stick that floppy in, make an image, and go at it. There's nobody really has that capability. But to continue on with the story, BTK asked this. The police said yes, of course. And so on February 16th, 2005, they received a package. I can't remember how they got it, but the package contained a floppy disk. I found this image. I think this might actually be an image of the actual floppy disk. And I just want to say one thing about this. First off, how many people here actually use 3.5-inch floppy disks? All right, good. I don't feel that old then. This floppy disk, I remember it. And these types, if I remember right, they were sold at the teeny bopper boutiques in the mall. So kind of gives you a little bit about the attacker right there, the BTK. Not saying he's not masculine, but you know what? If you have to shop there for floppy disks. But in any case, this disk directly led to the capture of the killer, which I find extremely fascinating. You have at this point 30 plus years of the serial killer out, and he's taken down by a floppy disk. So how did that happen? So I talked to Randy Stone, who was the forensic investigator on the case. If you go and you read a lot of articles about how he was captured, they kind of hint at this, but they always talk about the lead detective, and I apologize, I don't remember the lead detective's name. He passed away a couple years ago, but I was able to figure out that Randy Stone was the forensic investigator who did the actual hands-on analysis of this disk. He is actually the director of incident response for Strauss Freeburg. So if you know who they are a huge company that does IR and forensics and lots of other things. He was nice enough to let me conduct an interview with him over LinkedIn. And that's another cool thing about this. Looking at the history of this, if we wanted to do kind of a forensics history of something like Jack the Ripper or even like the Easdale woman, which happened in, I think, the 60s or 70s. Some of those people who did those cases, they're long gone. They're dead. The evidence is gone. The computer forensics cases that I'm talking about here, and actually most of them, the people who did them are still around. They're still working. We can reach out to them on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and actually ask them, what did you do? How did you do this? And, assuming that they were allowed to talk about this. And so that's what I did. I asked Randy, how did you do this? What did you do? I was kind of expecting like something really cool here. But it was really simple. He took the floppy disk, he imaged it with Encase, which is good. He followed proper standard procedures of not working on the original floppy disk. As he was looking through the disk, I think the note the BTK left them was in a text file or something like that. However, they were able to recover a deleted Word document on the disk. So, he looked for not just what was on the disk, he tried to recover files, and found this Word document. So he opened a copy of the document. So I asked him, about this. How did he analyze this Word document? Because I was expecting, I was going to open it in a hex editor. I was going to do all this. He told me that he basically had a bunch of people standing behind him as he was doing this. So you can imagine this is a huge case. He probably has the chief of police. He has the lead investigator. He probably, maybe has somebody from like city council, maybe even the mayor or somebody like that. All these people just kind of sitting behind him. So imagine you're trying to analyze something, I'm sure, everybody's had this. For the pen testers in here, when you're doing your work, the client's like standing over your shoulder, seeing what you're doing, things like that. Imagine that. So he told me that he wanted to do something really cool, like open it up in a hex editor and, just kind of go through the bits and bytes to impress everybody. But he literally just opened it up in Word. When he did that, he went to the metadata. So how many people in here are pen testers? Do like OSI? How many of those? How many of you go and before you do like a pen test, you do open source intelligence scanning and pull metadata out of documents? Metadata is super powerful, and literally that's what he did. He just went to the file properties in Word, and he found two key things. First, it was had been created at a location called Christ Lutheran Church, and this document was last modified by somebody named Dennis. This very quickly led to them finding Dennis Rader, who was the BTK killer. Rader was the president of the church council. They were able to tie a lot of evidence to him. In one particular case, when he dropped off one of the packages that he was showing with police, they saw him. I think they saw the person driving off in a black Cherokee. When they drove by his house, they saw that he owned a black Cherokee. They actually subpoenaed his daughter for DNA. I can't remember how they got her to do it. They didn't say it was for murders, but they got her DNA and were able to create the match that way to the DNA they had collected at various scenes. So they were able to very quickly arrest him after that. So first off, I just again want to say, how cool is it that the serial killer who had been at large for 30 plus years, they caught him because of metadata. Metadata in a Word document that he thought he had deleted, which I just think is just so freaking awesome. All right, so what can we learn from this case? First off, data is never deleted. I think we probably know that, or at least hopefully we know that. If not, you know it now. When you delete a file on a disk or on a drive, it's not gone. Windows doesn't overwrite those bytes. You need another program or a special deletion program to do that. And so it is possible to recover data from disks. It's possible to recover files. And even if you can't recover the whole file, you can recover bits and pieces. That's why we do, in forensics, that's why we do keyword searches across an entire disk looking at the slack space. We might find something that's just a kind of a key indicator that just gives us that little piece of information that we can then pivot off of. Granted, floppy disks, 3.5-inch floppy disks were 1.44 megabytes. Our average disk that we look at least, in the cases that I work, are usually, 64, 128, 256 gigabytes. So, you're dealing with a lot more data now. But, this is the key thing to remember here is data is never deleted. Well, actually, I guess the key thing here to remember is if you're a serial killer, don't, ask the police if they can trace you, because they're going to say no. But, the next thing is look everywhere for evidence. In a lot of cases that I work or that my team works, we're very focused. In incident response, you have to be laser focused because you are in a critical situation. There is, panic going on, there's chaos going on, and you need to find some answers very quickly. So we often don't have time to do a complete forensic analysis of any systems. However, while there are key places that we look in forensics, you kind of have to, at some point, have to kind of take a step back and look everywhere. If Randy Stone had not gone and looked for deleted files on the disk, or deleted data on the disk, if he had just threw that floppy in and looked and saw a text file and that was it, and given up from there, he probably would not have found or broken the case open. So you need to really look everywhere for evidence. Next, metadata is powerful. It is absolutely powerful. I think we know this. Either on the forensic side, the incident response side, when a lot of times we work business email compromise cases, these wire transfer fraud cases. And in these cases, the attackers will send over PDF documents. And not only trying to figure out, are those PDF documents malicious, we're trying to figure out, where did they come from? And metadata is key for that. In addition to that, obviously with pen tests, you can find a lot of information like usernames, email addresses, things like that from the metadata of documents. So metadata is super powerful. If you work in an organization, it's not a bad idea to maybe talk to some people, especially your legal department. They may already have this set up to install like plugins or programs that automatically delete metadata out of documents. There are some Word now has some ways to do that automatically, but you may not want to have that information leaked out, and so you can actually get programs that will automatically delete this out for you. And then finally, learn when to ask for help. That we really don't see that in this particular case, but I asked Randy, is there anything that you would tell computer forensics or IR analysts today based on your experience? And I'm not going to read that whole thing, but it basically boils down to know when you're in over your head. I see this a lot, especially on my side of the industry on IR and forensics. IR and forensics is huge. It's a huge space. We don't always, on my team, we have a breadth of experience, but we're not experienced in everything. Every once in a while we get a call from a client that says, I've got this one system over here that's been compromised, I need you to analyze it, and we probably have never even heard of that system. So we know when we're in overhead. Fortunately, we have the resources, at least at TrustedSec, that I can go to our research team or our other pen testers, and somebody has had the experience with that. But the big thing is, know when you're in over your head. Don't be afraid to ask for help. In this industry, there are so many people out there. I know a lot of people have egos, but even if you get into the right Discords and the right Slacks or the right people on Twitter and ask them a question, there are lots of people who are more than willing to help you out. So just kind of remember that. Any questions on the first case so far? Cool. All right. So we're going to go to the second case, case of Julie Amero. Has anybody heard of this one? Oh, cool. All right. This is another one that I found fascinating. Probably because I think one of the reasons that I find both these cases fascinating is they both kind of broke around the same time. And this is when I was really starting my forensics and IR career. I've been in security for over 20 years, since the mid-90s. But I didn't get into forensics until early 2000s or so. So this was still fairly new to me. So I kind of latched onto these cases. But okay, so Julie Amero. Julie was a substitute teacher in the 7th grade, and on October 19th, 2004. Again, remember this is early 2000s. We're dealing with Windows XP. We're dealing with IE 3 or 4.0. I don't even think Firefox was called Firefox then. It was probably still called, what was it before? Yeah, whatever it was called before Mozilla. So we're still dealing with the early age of forensics. On this date, as she was teaching, the computer she was using started showing pornographic images to students, or at least that's what was said. There are some disputes as to whether or not the students actually saw this. It wasn't like today where you have a computer hooked up to a projector. I believe, based on the pictures that I've seen, she had a desk in the front of the class. There was a computer with a big, CRT monitor that was actually faced towards her, not the student. So there's actually some dispute as to whether or not the students actually saw anything, but that's what she was charged with. She ended up being charged with a number of counts of risk of injury to a minor, which is actually a felony where she was at. So this is not a light charge. The whole case presumed around that she went to the links on purpose, and that she showed them to the students, or that she didn't make an effort to hide them from the students. She went to trial on January 5th, 2007. She was convicted, but sentencing was delayed. But she faced a maximum sentence of 40 years. So this is not a simple case. This is not a fine and a slap on the hand. We're talking about serious time here. Now, at this point, the judge and the prosecutor asked for sentencing to be delayed. I could not find the exact reason why, but I think it basically boils down to that they were not satisfied with some of the evidence that had been presented. And so I think some of the things that we're going to talk about here kind of led from that. But in any case, sentencing was delayed. On March 6, 2007, so this started to make news. This started to make national news that this had happened. And so as people started looking into this, they started realizing something's not right here. Something isn't adding up. And so on March 6, 2007, there was an ad taken out in the Hartford Courant. This is what the ad said. I pulled this off of archive.org. A lot of these sites, even though they really didn't happen too long ago, like 15 years ago or so, a lot of these articles in that, they're no longer on the sites. And so the Wayback Machine was freaking amazing for researching this. And I'll publish these slides too. That I have all the links to everything in here. But in any case, in the Hartford Courant, a open letter was sent out it was published by 28 computer science professors from some major universities around the country, such as Yale, Wesleyan, University of Hartford, and multiple others. And basically what it said is, it kind of came down to that, look, we've watched this case, we've read through the transcript, something isn't adding up. Please have somebody do a kind of independent analysis of this. And so this kind of plea went out to anybody who has forensic experience to take a look at this. With that, on March 21st of that year, so about 2 weeks after that, multiple forensics analysts led by Alex Eckelberry of Sunbelt Software reviewed the evidence and published their opinion. I believe they worked with the defense. They were actually able to get the image that was taken of the computer that all this happened on. And they did a forensic analysis of it and published their results. Now, the thing to remember, there were two key things that helped lead to Amero's conviction. Two people who testified that led to her conviction. The first was the Norwich Public Schools IT manager, and then the Norwich police detective. Their names are all over the place. If you go look at them, I'm not up here to shame anybody, so I didn't put their names in here. Now, the reason she got... So, first thing, too, a public schools IT manager definitely does not have forensic training. I can almost guarantee that. I talk to them all the time. They don't, today. Police detective, maybe, probably not to the extent that we would expect. But as the testimony showed, he at least knew how to use some forensic software. And I'll get into that. Now, the reason she was convicted came down to two things. First is that the jury was convinced or that she purposely clicked on the link. So in other words, this wasn't an accident. She had gone out to these porn sites, she had clicked on the links, and that is what ended up being on the screen, and that she made no effort to hide it from the students. We're not really going to talk about this second part. There are a lot of different things about that. It's not as interesting. It doesn't really deal with the computer forensic stuff. But we are going to definitely dive into this first one, that she purposely clicked on the links. And we know this is true because one of the jurors actually gave an interview in 2007 talking about why she was convicted. And when you read what he says, it really does go into that she did this on purpose, is what it came down to. That she was the one who clicked on the links. She was the one who went and did this. She did it on purpose, so therefore she must be punished. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to, instead of going through and saying, this is what the prosecution said, this is what was testified, and then go through everything else afterwards, I'm going to kind of do a compare and contrast. So, going through the evidence, and all this, again, you can read in the published opinion of the secondary analysis. So the original claim was that sites from the temporary internet files directory on the disk were listed. So in other words, the detective went into the temporary internet files directory and just listed all of the websites that were in there. The firewall logs were also examined, and both of these combined were used to show evidence of access to the porn sites and intent. The intent there is the key part. So in other words, when they were on the stand, the detective and the school manager essentially said, the only way that they could be listed in these sites is because she clicked on those links. Well, that really doesn't, add up. And again, this is from the opinion and, based on my experience doing forensic analysis, this is true. The Internet Cache, the temporary Internet Files directory, does show evidence of access. If a file is in there from a website, somehow your computer went to that site. You may not have done that, but it went there. But it does not show if it was accessed on purpose. It does not show intent. So think about when you go to a website. How many ads are loaded? How many images are loaded? And those could be loaded from anywhere. Those are going to be stored in your Internet Cache. Does that mean you actually clicked on that link to go to that site? No. It just means that your browser or something on your computer went to that site. The second is that the history file, the index.dat, so we're dealing with IE here, back in 2004, the index.dat history file was not examined. So in other words, the detective only looked at what was in the cache. They did not look at the history. They did not look at the cookies. They did not look at any other aspects of the browsing history. Just what was in the cache. So this is an issue because, again, we're going back to intent here. None of this is showing intent. This is just showing that, yes, the computer went to these sites. The big thing here, too, is that, again, the porn links were clicked on. This, on the left-hand side is the testimony. I'm not going to read that. What it boils down to is the detective said that the links on the porn sites were a different color. So what they did was they actually imaged the system with Norton Ghost. Does anybody remember Norton Ghost? All right, cool. Yeah, you don't want to use Norton Ghost for forensics, for forensic imaging. I mean, you can if you're in a bind, but that's not really the way to do it. But that's what they used. And so with Norton Ghost, they were actually able to restore the computer somewhere else and boot it up. And so they had actually done this, and they had looked at they had loaded up the pages, and the detective said, because the links, and I'll show an image of this in a second, because the links on the porn sites were a different color, therefore, she had clicked on them. So if you recall, I don't know how much this is done actually now because of CSS and all of that, but back then, most browsers, if you clicked on a link, it would change to a different color just to show that you had already gone there. Their reasoning here was because these links on these sites were a different color, they were clicked on. On the right, you really can't see that, so I apologize. It's probably better that you can't see this, but this is an actual image of a screenshot that was taken of that page. And you can kind of see here that one of these links is in bright red, and that's what they were pointing to, that because this link was in bright red, she had clicked on it. So she cannot say that she did not go to these sites. We have the evidence right here. It visually shows that. Well, as the forensic analysis was done independently, they found that, first off, the links that have, what it comes down to is whether or not you click on them. If you've gone to a website or your computer has gone to a website in your history, that link will change color. So in other words, if I was on a web page and I had a link to a site, if I manually typed in that link and then went back to that page, that link would still be a different color because you had gone to it. It checks your history file for that. But the big thing here was that they found that Internet Explorer on this computer was actually configured to show that visited links would be shown in green, not red. Their big thing here, and they actually called this out in the trial, that she visited this because it was red. That's what it comes down to. Unfortunately, i.e. on that computer, the configuration had been changed by the schools so that if the link had been visited, it would actually be green, not red. So that kind of throws that out there. Additionally, they analyzed the HTML source of that page, of that link there, and they had found that it was hard-coded in that page that link would be red. So that's why it was red. The website had coded it that way. So this whole thing about her clicking on the link had basically now gotten thrown out. And that, again, kind of shows, one of their main kind of points here, that she had, gone and clicked on this link, that had been thrown out. Now, another thing that they found was the tool that the detective used was called Computer Cop. They used Computer Cop Professional. That is the only tool that he used. He basically loaded up the computer in Computer Cop, and Computer Cop, it will go through and it'll find images, it will find web pages, you can do keyword searches, and so he did that and basically only looked at the evidence that came back from that. He did not do any manual analysis. He did not open up any other tools. He only used this tool. So there are a couple of issues with that. The first is that at this point in time, and I don't even know now if it is, but it was not a widely accepted or used tool. I don't think it is now. It's actually still around, surprisingly. I actually pulled this image from the 2007 version of the page. But yeah, so it's still around. Even the vendor came out and said that yes, it will pull this evidence, but it can't tell you intent. It can't tell you why that's on the computer. It will show you that the image is there. It will show you that the HTML page is there, but unfortunately, it can't tell you why that's there. There's just no way to determine that. And finally, again, the detective used no other tools. He literally only relied on Computer Cop. And when you're doing forensic analysis, you can't do that. Your tools are great. I love tools. Tools give you really good information. A couple years ago, though, Harlan Carvey coined this term. If you don't know who Harlan Carvey is, he's a really, not famous, but really popular forensic person. He teaches for SANS and things like that. But he coined the term Nintendo forensics. And basically what this meant was, as these tools come out, as NCASE is getting more powerful, as FTK is getting more powerful, analysts are only learning how to use the tools. They don't understand what to do when that tool breaks. And you need to understand that. There are many times when I'm working on a case or I'm reviewing a report for one of my team members, and they only look at it one way, and I'll have like 50 questions around that. Well, did you look at it like this? What about this? This. Because everything that we look at, can go to court. And this is a great example of that. You can't just, if somebody's life is literally on the line here, 40 years this woman was looking at being sentenced to, you need to look every way you can in order to, find that data and confirm it. But so, the tools that the detective used, a little bit iffy. Finally, they made a claim that she had to have gone to these links because there was no malware on the system. So they had claimed that the computer had inoculate IT antivirus on the computer, and that it was up to date. And they also testified. I don't think this was the detective who testified this. I think this was the school manager. That malware or spyware is not capable of spawning pornographic pop-ups. So there is no way that spyware, even if it was on there, would be showing these pornographic images, because we've never seen that. Additionally, endless loop pop-ups were not possible. Apparently what happened was she would go to close the window, and then another one would pop up, or like two more would pop up. And so every time she tried to close one of these sites showing this porn, another one would pop up. And they testified, well, no, that's not possible. What she's describing is not even possible, which again, I'm sure we've never seen. So what it came down to was malware was not on the system. Well, when they did the analysis, found a couple things. First, the antivirus was no longer supported by the vendor. In fact, it had been discontinued. And so while, remember, this happened in October, the last signature that occurred, last signature update that occurred was on June 30th, 4 months prior. And that was the last time the vendor had even released signatures. So there was at least 4 months where they thought it was getting updated, but it actually wasn't. And then, of course, spyware was 100% capable of displaying porno pop-ups. It's absolutely possible. This is just kind of a screenshot from, again, the opinion that was published, showing that they actually, again, because Ghost, they were able to boot up that computer. They were able to show that in fact the last signature was months prior to this happening. And in fact, the detective even admitted he did not look on the computer for any type of malware or spyware or anything like that. So he didn't even go and look for it. He just, solely relying on what ComputerCom told him. So was there spyware? Well, yeah, of course. So the new analysis found that there was a spyware program called new.net on the system. So the way that new.net works is it is a browser search hijacker. So essentially what would happen is, back then and even now, people would, in the browser, I can't remember what it's called, where you type in the URL, instead of typing in the URL, they would type in their search. What would happen is the new.net would intercept that, because it would generate an error page. They would intercept that error page and then show the person who had this installed what the spyware wanted them to see. It was actually discovered that this was installed 5 days prior to the event. So on October 14th, it was installed, and it was actually installed when a Halloween screensaver was installed onto the system. So if you remember back to, even now, don't go searching for free screensaver because you're probably going to be downloading malware. Or I guess if you want malware to analyze, go search for free screensavers. In addition to new.net being installed, there was another program called Free Offers from Freeze.com installed. So, that sounds very legitimate. So they even found, too, that on October 19th, when this happened, somebody had actually searched for new hairstyles, and new.net would have intercepted this. So that I think the theory is that probably Amero had searched for this during downtime or something like that. The new.net had intercepted it and then just started showing the porn pop-ups from there. So what happened because of all this? And let me say, too, I really recommend going and reading the opinion. It's not too long. It's like maybe 15, 20 pages with images. It's a very easy read. It's really, really good. I'm really impressed by what they were able to do, 16 years ago. And there were some pretty well-respected people who did this. So one of the people, his name's Joe Stewart. He actually works for, I think, Dell SecureWorks now. He has been in security since the beginning, doing all of this. Obviously, Alex Eccleberry was in charge of this. I really recommend going in and reading this. But what happened? So, because of this, on June 6, 2007, I should say judge, but the judge threw out the conviction against Amero, granted her a new trial, and then in November of the next year, the original charges were dropped. So, these 4 charges of basically contributing to a delinquency of a minor were gone. She was convicted of a misdemeanor disorderly conduct. I'm not sure why. I couldn't figure that out. I haven't read the court transcripts yet. It's interesting, in the opinion that was published on the forensic analysis, they actually do say that Amero was her worst own witness. She said a lot of things on the stand that she probably shouldn't have said, or couldn't remember some things. So that probably came to it. She paid $100. She did lose her teaching license, but I'm guessing that she didn't want to teach after that anyways. But great thing is, not convicted. So, what can we learn from this case? First off, don't rely on one tool. If you do get in this into forensics and you do need to do some type of analysis, don't just rely on one tool. There are lots of tools out there. There are free tools. There are commercial tools. Even if you are standardized by using Encase or FTK or one of the commercial tools, every once in a while go and look at the results from another tool to see maybe your tool is missing something. Encase misses stuff. FTK misses stuff. If you're analyzing things like the MFT on a Windows system, they're going to miss some things. They don't show you everything. Eric Zimmerman's Analyze MFT tool is amazing for analyzing file systems. Check out all these different tools, and maybe they won't work in all cases, but at least you'll have those that you can go in and check yourself. Second, again, look everywhere for evidence. Again, this goes back to not relying on one tool, but dig into everything. Don't just, in this case, the detective only looked in the temporary internet files directory. Look in the history. I don't know why you would just start there. The history is always the first place that I look at. So, definitely look everywhere for different types of evidence. Big thing, verify what your results are and then verify them again. Don't just rely on them on the first time. A lot of times, again, this kind of comes back to tools. Your tools are going to tell you one thing. Make sure that's correct. In forensics, at least, with what I do, every case that we work has the potential to go to court. I never want to go on a stand and find out that I screwed up because I did not verify some data and somebody else, did and double-checked my results and found out that I was wrong. Then finally, next, assume nothing. There were a lot of assumptions in this case, like malware can't show you pornographic pop-ups, things like that. Don't assume that. Verify all your data. And finally, this kind of gets back to what Randy Stone said. If you get in over your head, ask for help. There's no shame in that, especially if you're doing something like this. You want to be able to, make sure that you're doing the right thing. So please ask for help. All right. So I know we've been talking for about 45 minutes right now. Last case, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, actually, get to the really cool parts. So let me say, too, this case is one that I worked at a former employer, not anybody that I'm associated with right now. Again, this was, I'll kind of state, it was not done in a classified setting. Others from the team have actually talked about this case even before I did, so I feel comfortable talking a little bit more about this. So, at this time, the organization that I was working for was getting a lot of APT. If you're not familiar with APT they're Advanced Persistent Threats. They are usually state-sponsored attackers, not always, but in this case it was a state-sponsored attacker that was constantly compromising the organization and going through and stealing information, compromising other systems. And so my team was actually created to help combat this. My role on the team was as the reverse engineer. This was one of my first true IR jobs. I was on the IR team. Everybody did IR and forensics, but we each had our own specializations. Mine was malware analysis and reverse engineering. And so this particular APT threat actor, they had a backdoor that they always used. There were multiple versions. They actually versioned their software, and we were able to determine that. The interesting thing was they used various command and control protocols. They used HTTP, they had an FTP version, they had an SSL version. To get into the bits and bytes, if you dug into it in a disassembler, it was written in C++, it was object-oriented, and so they could just literally add a new plugin to change the C2 protocol very, very quickly. And they also implemented some type of encryption around their C2 traffic. So it wasn't just like, we could sniff the traffic and see what they were doing. Unfortunately, it was not that easy. So, I had a copy of this backdoor. My job was to reverse engineer it. So I had a couple goals. And this is something that I always recommend. If you've ever taken any of my malware analysis courses, or actually any of my courses, I always say, when you go into an investigation, when you're doing malware analysis, when you're doing forensics, have goals in mind. Because if you don't, you're just going to be bouncing all over the place. You rarely have time to do everything that you want. And so you want to focus and, meet those goals. And if you have more time, then you go on to the next goals. But my goals were, let's see if we can break the encryption. It was doing this encryption over the network. I wanted to see if we could get into that. I wanted to see if we could break that. Second, determine what the commands were within it. This was a backdoor, and so the attacker was obviously sending some type of commands to and from it. And so I wanted to know, what those commands were, because that's going to help us determine what the attacker's capabilities are. Not really a goal, but the good news is. I had resources available to me that had already accomplished some of this. We had instrumented our network. I will give my boss at the time credit for this. He had instrumented our network, and this was a global network. He had instrumented it with network full PCAP capture, which at this point in time was pretty rare to have. Globally. So we had the ability to get on these systems. We had created these sensors, and so we could actually deploy our own code to them. We could do things very, very quickly. Additionally, there was actually, probably still is, a lot of our competitors, their security teams and us, we had gotten together and formed a group because we were all getting hit by this organization. And so we were sharing information. This was like one of the first kind of unofficial fusion centers where, all of these like really, really smart people were coming together and they were sharing this information. So I actually had people I could bounce things off of. To my knowledge of what I'm about to talk about, nobody else had figured out. Or if they had, they didn't talk about it. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So, because I work for TrustedSec, I am contractually obligated to include memes in a presentation. From here on out, we're going to be getting into some technical stuff. I will do my best to summarize it as best I can too, because I know nobody wants to stare, or most people don't want to stare at IDA Pro. But here we go. So, as I reverse engineered this, the encryption on this back door, I found out that it actually used XOR to encrypt the data. Now, if you're not familiar with XOR, it's a mathematical operation that you take one value, you XOR it to another value, and you get a third value out. It's used a lot in encryption. You should not use it for encryption, or at least solely for encryption, because let's say you have value A, you XOR it by a key and get value B. In order to get that value back, all you have to do is XOR the encoded value by the key or by the original value, and you get that third value. So it's not really the most secure. It's not really encryption. It's more obfuscation. But the initial key that the attacker created, they would go through this loop here. They would basically go through a loop 15 times. They would increase the loop value by a certain amount. They would mod it by a value, and then they would place that value into a byte array. So you would end up with a 16-byte XOR key. The key thing to remember here is that the initial key, at least in the first pass, is always the same key. It's a static value every single time. 100%, you are always going to get this key. I looked at different versions of the back door. They did not change it. You always get this key. So that was the initial key generation. They actually went through a second time to modify that key. And the way that they did that is they would take this static value over here. Again, looked at different versions. That static value did not change. They would loop through the key, the original key, the one that we have here. They would loop through it and XOR the bytes of the static value against the key. And so what would happen is you would end up with this key. Again, we're still getting a static key. Across all the different versions, after the initial key generation, you still get this key. Now, it would have been very simple for them to modify this. All they had to do was modify this, salt value, and you'd get something different, but they didn't. So we have our initial key. Around the encryption itself, like I said, all the data that was sent in every packet, and they actually encrypted each packet that was sent out, the data in each packet. It was encrypted using this 16-byte XOR key. Now, two things to remember. The data was a variable length. It wasn't like there was like this static buffer that they would send that was always 16 bytes or 256 bytes or something like that. It was this variable length. The second is that they would actually create two random numbers to obfuscate the data length and modify the XOR key. The reason they did this is that's how they introduced some randomness to this. They would create these two random values, and then they would take those random values and modify this static XOR key and the length of the data. That's how they did it right there, obfuscating the length. It doesn't really matter. This is how they would go through and modify the XOR key, that static XOR key, with the random number that they generated. They would basically just take that second random number. They would copy the first 2 bytes of the XOR key. They would do this like loop over it, and then they would copy those first 2 bytes back into the key. What I just said is a huge mistake. They only did this to the first 2 bytes of the XOR key. The rest of the XOR key was still static. I believe that this was a programming error on their part. And this right here, because they screwed up in this way, led to, I probably still could have broken it if they did it to the whole thing, but this led to us being able to detect them at any point in time on our network, and I'll explain how. So, I went through all that. What does that all mean? If you just kind of glossed over by looking at all those IDA Pro shots. What it comes down to is the backdoor creates a 16-byte encryption key. The initial value is a static value. They only modified the first 2 bytes of the encryption key with a random value. So because we know what the static key is, except for the first 2 bytes, then in theory, even if I couldn't figure out anything more, I could take the rest of that static value and I could decrypt their traffic. And then finally, it would obfuscate the length of the data with a random value. So this is what the encrypted packet looked like in each one that was sent. The first 2 bytes would be the random number that was used to modify the length. That random number was modified a little bit, although, again, it was a static value that they modified it by, so it was very easy to get back. Then the next 2 bytes would be the obfuscated length. So because we know what the random number is, we can take that and we can figure out what the length of the data is supposed to be. The next 4 bytes, the next 2 bytes were the random number that modified the XOR key. Again, this was modified a little bit, but we could figure out why. It was done in a static way, so we could figure that out. And then bytes 6 through whatever, that was all the obfuscated data. Bytes 8 through 9 were the command. It was like a number value that equaled something. So again, because we know all of this information, we can decrypt this entire packet. Because only the first 2 bytes of this key are modified, those are the only ones that we don't know. However, they send the random number that was used to modify those bytes in the packet. So we can then take that and figure out what it's supposed to be. So we can decrypt everything in this packet. This, again, is hard to see. I apologize. Apparently, this happened in 2010, so 11 years ago is when this happened. This is a decoding program that I wrote. I worked with somebody on my team. We made it in real time, so we could actually throw this on one of our sensors, run it, and in real time, it would detect the backdoor traffic, and it would decode it. A couple things to kind of show here. We were able to figure out all the commands. It had a heartbeat command. It had a shell command, and then, once you type shell, it would give you back a shell, and then the attacker could type in the commands, and we could see everything in real time. And this is very, very key to what I'm about to talk to next. Additionally, the heartbeat command was all zeros. The great thing is, 0 XORed by any number is that number. So if you XOR 0 with 10, the resulting value is 10. So because of that, because of where the command was in the packet, that is a static value. It was not modified, so we could then write a snort signature at the time to detect this. So we were actually able to determine, write a signature to find any compromised system in our organization using snort. The one part I didn't leave out here, UPS, that was what we called the APT group. So you can probably go and look it up who UPS is. UPS is. I think they're APT1 or somebody. So, but yeah. But in other words, if they were on our network, we would be able to detect it because we had visibility across the entire global organization, and we could decrypt their traffic in real time. So what happened? Who cares? Great, Tyler, you're able to do this. So this is the cool part of the story, and this is the part of the story that I love. So one night, our heartbeat alert went off. The APT was in the network. We had these alerts so that, if the search that I was on was very small. I think we were like 4 or 5 people. We had, when these alerts went off, it was all hands on deck. Doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter what time. I actually had these alerts sent to my phone. I had a BlackBerry at the time. It would be sent to my phone through email and or through a text. And when the phone saw that, you guys remember Janine in Ghostbusters where she screams out, "We got one?" Yeah, that's what it would go off. Which sounded great at the time until it's 3 a.m. and it goes off for the 5th time, and my wife is just not happy. But this goes off. In fact, I think this happened of course, it happened on a Friday night. It was like at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So it wasn't too bad. But the alert went off. The APT was in our network. Everybody kind of jumped on. So what we did was using this real-time encoding, we were actually able to watch the attacker in real time. This was the first time we were able to do this. We were able to see them connect to each system that they were connecting to. So we had this visibility. We had the decoder going. We were actually watching them type their commands of connecting from one system to the other. So what we did was when they would connect to one system, we'd take that system down. As they would try to go to another system, we would take that system down. So one by one, as the attackers are going to these systems, some of which we did not know they had access to, we would immediately take that system down. And as this happened, soon the attacker had no systems left. You could actually see them type as they were typing these commands, trying to figure out why the system they had literally connected to 3 seconds before was no longer responding. They were starting to panic. You could see that they were making more mistakes in their typing and all this. It was so cool to see. But with this, we were actually able to find everywhere the attacker had. We kicked them out, and to my knowledge, we never saw them come back. And this is a group that had been plaguing us for years. Now, did they never come back? I can't tell you. The kind of downside of this is we kind of revealed our hand that we knew what they were doing. We could see what they were doing. So they may have switched to an entirely new back door. I obviously eventually left that organization. To my knowledge, though, they never saw them again. So if we did actually scare them enough to kick them out, it worked. So that was so cool. So what can we learn from this? And I know I'm over time, so I apologize. First off, don't roll your own. First off, don't roll your own encryption. Obviously, this is a kind of standard thing. The adversary went and did this. They tried to be smart. They tried to do all these loops to modify their XOR key, and they failed horribly. If they would have used something like RC4 or something else like that, chances are we would not have been able to break their encryption. Reverse engineering is powerful. If you don't have somebody on your staff that can do reverse engineering or malware analysis, find somebody who can. It is super powerful. You don't want to be uploading malware to VirusTotal. You don't want to be necessarily sending it to your antivirus company because once you do that, again, you kind of reveal your hand to the attacker, or you reveal to the world that you have been attacked. Have somebody on staff who can do this, or work with somebody who can. They can get you a lot of the information that you need very, very quickly. Or at least, if nothing else, work with some of these online sites like Joe Sandbox and Any.Run. You can purchase a private sandbox, so what you upload is not shared with anybody. Visibility and instrumentation is key. The reason we were able to do this is because my boss had worked very, very hard to get network sensors deployed on most networks around the world, at least all of the major networks in this organization. If we had not had that visibility, we would have probably seen the attacker go to a certain location, and then we would have lost sight of them. A lot of organizations I see, when they put up IDS or something like that, it is only on their internet connection. There is a lot of stuff going on your internal network. You need to have visibility into that. Even if it's just something like NetFlow, you don't need to deploy like Darktrace or a full IDS. Even if you have something like NetFlow going on your network, on your internal network, that can be extremely powerful. And then finally, one person is not an IR team. I played a key role in this, but so did all the other people that I worked with. We had the person, obviously my boss, who I mentioned, who got all the network sensors deployed. We had a network engineer who worked tirelessly to get those working at top speed. We had the person who had written the shell for my script so that I could literally just write the decoding part, plug it into his, and it automatically became real time. So, an IR team is a team. You need to work with multiple people. Everybody's going to have a role, and as you work together, like in this case, you can do some pretty freaking awesome things. So I have been talking for